The sky burned the day they came. They weren't gods. They weren't saviors. They weren't explorers looking for peaceful contact. No, they were something far worse, an empire that had crushed 1,000 civilizations before ours, an unstoppable force that had never known defeat. To them, Earth was nothing more than a mistake, a rogue species that had advanced too fast, too dangerously. They saw our ambition as a threat, our defiance as an insult. And so, they came to erase us. It started with a signal. A strange transmission intercepted by deep space observatories, a language not human, yet unmistakably clear in its intent. A warning, or maybe just a statement of fact. Prepare for extinction. At first, no one believed it. Some thought it was a hoax, a garbled frequency bouncing off some long-forgotten satellite. But then the ships arrived, vast and alien, blotting out the stars. They didn't demand surrender. They didn't offer terms. They simply opened fire. Cities fell in minutes. Not with nuclear fire, not with the brutal efficiency of carpet bombings. No, the Empire was far more advanced than that. Their weapons defied our understanding, twisting matter itself, unraveling concrete and steel like sand slipping through fingers. Millions vanished before the world even knew what was happening. Armies mobilized. Governments scrambled, but Earth had never faced an enemy like this. Our missiles couldn't track them. Our jets were swatted from the sky like insects. Our greatest weapons meant nothing. And yet we didn't break. We should have. Any other species would have. It was logical. It was inevitable. But humans have never been good at following rules. Scattered resistance groups formed before the dust even settled. Soldiers who refused to lay down their weapons, civilians who had nothing left to lose. Underground bunkers became command centers. Stolen enemy tech was ripped apart and repurposed in ways even the invaders hadn't anticipated. What the Empire didn't understand, what they couldn't understand, was that humanity had spent its entire existence surviving against impossible odds. We weren't the strongest. We weren't the smartest. But we were relentless. The first real victory didn't come from a massive army or some secret weapon. It came from a handful of people ordinary in every way except for their sheer unwillingness to die. A resistance cell deep in the ruins of what had once been a major city discovered something the invaders had overlooked. A weakness. Not in their ships, not in their weapons, but in their arrogance. The Empire had never fought an enemy that adapted faster than they could destroy. They had never faced a species that learned from every loss and turned it into the next fight. And so, the tide began to turn. It started with ambushes. Small, precise strikes on enemy patrols, scavenging whatever technology we could steal. Their weapons weren't supposed to be usable by human hands, but we made them work anyway. Then came the sabotage, supply lines disrupted, communications hijacked. They had the numbers. They had the firepower. But we had something else: desperation, fury, and the sheer, unbreakable will to fight for every inch of our planet. One battle changed everything. A resistance team infiltrated an enemy stronghold, deep beneath what was left of Earth's surface. What they found there wasn't just technology, it was proof. Proof that we weren't the only ones. The Empire had done this before. Many times. To countless worlds. And every time, those civilizations had been wiped out, reduced to nothing more than distant echoes in the void. But humanity had one advantage they never did: a warning. A reason to push harder, to fight dirtier, to resist with everything we had. Because if we lost, it wouldn't just be the end of Earth. It would be the end of the last species in the galaxy that had the courage to say no. And then, just as the resistance prepared for its next move, something unexpected happened. The Empire hesitated. It was small, subtle. A moment of hesitation in a war machine that had never known doubt. But it was there. And if they could hesitate, they could fear. The battle wasn't over. It had barely begun. But for the first time since the sky had burned, humanity had something more than just survival. Hope. And hope, as the Empire was about to learn, is the most dangerous weapon of all. The Empire's hesitation didn't last long. Their warships still loomed in the sky, their patrols still hunted anyone who dared to fight back. But something had changed. A crack had formed in their perfect, unstoppable machine. And cracks, no matter how small, could be widened. The resistance didn't waste time. They couldn't afford to. Across the shattered remains of cities, survivors gathered in hidden bunkers, passing along stolen information, sharing whatever scraps of knowledge they had. Some had seen the enemy up close, fought them in the ruins, learned the way their machines moved, the way their foot soldiers hesitated in tight corridors, how their drones relied on patterns that, once recognized, could be disrupted. Every detail mattered. Every observation could be the key to the next battle. But no one could explain why the Empire had hesitated. That question gnawed at those who had been fighting since the beginning. The Empire had never given a sign that it saw humans as anything more than an infestation to be eradicated. They didn't negotiate. They didn't waste time. And yet, something had made them pause. Something had forced them to reassess. A handful of resistance leaders gathered in an abandoned military outpost, deep beneath what had once been a thriving metropolis. They were hardened fighters now, their faces lined with exhaustion, their bodies covered in scars, some fresh, some old. But their eyes burned with something the Empire had never expected: defiance. "We need to find out what they're afraid of," one of them said. "Before they decide it isn't worth hesitating anymore." That was the mission. The most dangerous one yet. Not a battle, not an ambush, something much harder. They needed information. Deep in enemy territory, beneath the wreckage of a fallen skyscraper, lay an outpost the Empire had fortified shortly after the invasion. It wasn't just a base. It was something more. Resistance scouts had seen strange activity there. Ships landing and leaving at odd intervals, cargo being moved under heavy guard, transmissions sent in a language that didn't match the Empire's usual cold efficiency. Whatever was in that outpost, it was important. And if it was important to the Empire, it was worth risking everything to uncover. The team sent on the mission knew what was at stake. They moved through the ruins like ghosts, avoiding patrols, slipping through shadows. The city was a graveyard now, its towering buildings reduced to jagged skeletons, its streets littered with debris and abandoned vehicles. But they weren't alone. Something else lurked in the ruins, something that even the Empire seemed wary of. It started as whispers on the comms. "I saw something move up ahead. Could be a patrol. No, it's not them." Then came the static. A strange interference that made their earpieces crackle, their vision blur for just a moment, and then silence. The kind of silence that made the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. They pressed forward, their weapons ready, their footsteps careful. And that was when they saw it. A figure not human, not entirely alien. Something in between. It stood in the shadows of a collapsed structure, watching. Not attacking. Not running. Just watching. One of the resistance fighters raised their weapon, but another held up a hand. "Wait." The figure tilted its head, as if studying them. Its body was wrapped in some kind of armor, but it wasn't the Empire's design. It was old, worn, patched together with different materials, as if it had seen centuries of battle. And then it spoke. Not in the Empire's language. Not in anything the Resistance had ever heard before. But somehow, the meaning was clear. "You are not supposed to be here." The team didn't move. Their weapons stayed raised, their bodies tense. The figure stepped closer, and the dim light revealed something more. The armor wasn't just old, it was damaged. Scarred. As if it had survived battles against something far worse than the Empire. One of the Resistance fighters finally found their voice. "Who are you?" The figure didn't answer. Not immediately. Instead, it lifted a hand, palm up, as if offering something. A small, metallic device. Something human-made. The fighter closest to it hesitated, then reached out, taking the device carefully. It was a data drive. Old. Worn. But still functional. The figure took a step back. Then, another. And before anyone could react, it was gone, disappearing into the ruins, as if it had never been there. No one spoke for a long moment. Then, with a silent agreement, they turned back toward their mission. Whatever had just happened, it could wait. They reached the Empire's outpost just before dawn, slipping through the defenses like shadows. The Empire's soldiers were efficient, methodical, but not invincible. Guards were dispatched quietly. Security systems were bypassed. And then, finally, they reached the central chamber. Inside, rows of machines hummed with energy, displaying information and symbols that none of them could read. But one screen stood out. One screen showed something different. A star chart. A map of the galaxy. And marked on it were not just human territories, but others. Dozens. Hundreds. Some crossed out. Some still active. And among them, highlighted in a way that sent a chill down their spines, was Earth. One of the resistance fighters pulled out a small recording device, capturing everything they could. But before they could move, before they could even think about leaving, something shifted in the room. The machines flickered. The air grew heavy. And then a voice. Not over the comms. Not from any speaker. A voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. You should not have come here. The resistance fighters turned, weapons raised, but there was nothing there. Just the screens. The machines. And that map burning itself into their minds. Then the alarm started. The Empire knew they were here. They had to run. Now. They grabbed what they could, fleeing into the tunnels below as enemy forces swarmed the outpost. Bullets and energy blasts tore through the air, but they kept moving, pushing through the dark, through the ruins, through the suffocating weight of everything they had just discovered. Because this war wasn't just about Earth anymore. It never had been. And now, the Empire knew that humanity was no longer just fighting for survival. We were coming for them. And this time, they were afraid. They ran. Through crumbling tunnels, through the ruins of a city that had once belonged to them. Enemy drones swarmed above, scanning the wreckage, searching for any sign of movement. The Empire was relentless once they marked a target. And now, the resistance fighters weren't just survivors anymore. They were a problem. Blaster fire streaked past them, scorching the broken pavement. The resistance team ducked behind the remains of a collapsed freeway, catching their breath for just a second. Their leader clutched the stolen data drive, his fingers tightening around it like a lifeline. This wasn't just an occupation, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. It was a pattern. A cycle. Another fighter wiped blood from their face, breathing heavily. What do you mean? They've done this before. To other planets. Again and again. And they're still doing it. He turned the drive over in his hands, as if the weight of the knowledge inside it was pressing down on him. We weren't just a target. We were next in line. The silence that followed was heavier than the destruction around them. The war had always felt personal humanity fighting for its own survival. But now, they were staring at something far bigger. This wasn't just about Earth. It never had been. A distant explosion shook the ground. The Empire's forces were closing in. They had to move. The team split up, vanishing into the ruins, each taking a different escape route. The Empire might have the firepower, the technology, the overwhelming numbers, but humans had something else. They knew how to disappear. As they ran, the implications of what they had seen clawed at their minds. If Earth was just one of many, then there were others. Survivors. Or worse, civilizations already wiped out. Were there others still fighting? Or were they alone? The stolen data drive might hold those answers, but getting it back to the resistance leaders wouldn't be easy. The Empire would tear the city apart looking for them. Somewhere in the distance, a strange hum filled the air. Not the Empire's usual drones, not the sharp whine of their war machines. This was something different. And then they saw it. A shadow moving through the ruins, fast and precise. Not one of theirs. Not one of the Empire's. Something else. The same figure from before? Or something worse? The resistance fighters didn't have time to find out. The city was a death trap now, and they needed to reach the outskirts before the Empire locked down every exit. One of them took a different path, slipping through a collapsed building, hoping to outmaneuver the patrols. But as they rounded a corner, they stopped dead. Standing there, waiting, was a figure clad in battle-worn armor. Not human, not imperial, but something old. The figure didn't move, didn't speak, just watched. And then, slowly, it lifted its hand. Not a weapon, something else. A signal, a warning. And the realization hit like a cold blade to the spine. The Empire wasn't the only thing hunting in the dark. There was something else, something even they were afraid of. The resistance fighters' breath caught in their throat. The figure in the battle-worn armor didn't move, didn't speak. It just stood there, the dim glow of distant fires reflecting off its damaged plating. The moment stretched, heavy with something unspoken, something ancient. Then, the figure turned and walked away, disappearing into the ruins like a ghost. No time to process it. The Empire was still hunting. The fighter pressed on, weaving through the wreckage, the stolen data drive burning in their hand like a secret too big to hold. Elsewhere in the city, the rest of the team was running into their own problems. Imperial patrols had tightened their search, their machines scanning every alley, every shattered building. One fighter had barely escaped a sweeping drone, diving into an abandoned tunnel just before a searchlight passed overhead. The tunnels had once been part of the city's infrastructure, a forgotten maze beneath the streets. Now, they were a lifeline. But even down here, something felt wrong. The walls were covered in strange markings, scratches that hadn't been there before. A faint hum vibrated through the air, almost like breathing. The fighter's pulse quickened. They weren't alone. Above ground, the resistance leader had managed to evade the Empire soldiers, but the stolen data drive came at a cost. The mission was supposed to be quick, in and out. But now the city was a battlefield again, and the Empire wasn't just looking to eliminate rebels anymore. They were searching for something, or someone. Something in that outpost had changed everything. It wasn't just about crushing humanity. There was fear in the Empire's movements now. They were covering their tracks, destroying evidence, trying to erase whatever it was that had made them hesitate. And then the sky changed. A deep rumble rolled through the air. Not an explosion. Not an Imperial ship. Something else. The stars above seemed to shift, distort, like the fabric of space itself was being pulled apart. The resistance fighters still outside looked up, frozen, as a massive shadow formed above the city. It wasn't an Imperial warship. It was something older, something the Empire hadn't expected. And as the first ripples of energy crackled through the air, the resistance fighters understood. They weren't just fighting the Empire anymore. They had woken something far worse. The sky writhed like something alive. The massive shadow above the city stretched wider, swallowing the starlight, distorting everything beneath it. Resistance fighters crouched behind cover, staring up in stunned silence. Whatever was coming, it wasn't just another Imperial fleet. This was different. Older. Then, without warning, the Empire's forces shifted. Soldiers abandoned their positions, drones veered off course, war machines that had been methodically hunting down survivors suddenly turned and accelerated away. It wasn't a retreat, it was something worse. They were fleeing. The resistance leader gritted their teeth, gripping the stolen data drive tighter. "They're scared," they murmured. It was the first time they had ever seen the Empire run from anything. A new sound filled the air, low and unnatural, a vibration that rattled through stone and steel. Then the first explosion hit. But it wasn't an attack. It wasn't a weapon. Something was breaking through. A massive rift opened above the ruins, a jagged tear in space itself. Energy pulsed from within, casting eerie, shifting shadows across the wreckage. And then they began to emerge. Dark figures, unlike anything the Resistance had ever seen. Not Imperial. Not human. Their forms seemed to shift, flickering between solid and something else, like they weren't fully here. As they moved, the air around them warped, bending light in unnatural ways. The Empire had spent years exterminating humanity, burning cities to the ground, crushing any resistance. But whatever these things were, they had the Empire running like frightened animals. A resistance fighter pressed against the rubble, watching as an Imperial soldier, one who had been mercilessly hunting them minutes ago, turned to flee, only to be caught mid-step by the shadowy force. The soldier froze, convulsing, and in an instant his body twisted into something unrecognizable. A moment later, he was gone. Not killed, just gone. Panic spread like wildfire. The Empire's forces abandoned all strategy, some scrambling for their ships, others firing wildly at the encroaching entities. The weapons had no effect. The blasts fizzled out before even making contact. It was as if the things weren't fully in this reality. The resistance leader forced themselves to breathe. The Empire was collapsing in front of them, but that didn't mean humanity was safe. Whatever had come through that rift wasn't here to help. A burst of static crackled through their earpiece. "We need to get out now." It was one of the others, their voice tight with fear. "The tunnels aren't safe. They're already inside." The leader turned, pulse pounding. "What do you mean inside?" The radio hissed. A deep, guttural sound echoed through the transmission, something that wasn't human. Then, silence. The resistance fighters still in the ruins knew what they had to do. Whatever was happening, whatever nightmare had just arrived, they had only one chance: escape the city before it was swallowed whole. But as they turned to run, something moved ahead of them. The armored figure from before. It was waiting. And this time, it raised its weapon. The resistance leader froze. The armored figure stood motionless, weapon raised. It wasn't Imperial, but it wasn't running either. The resistance fighters gripped their weapons, knowing they stood between two unstoppable forces, whatever had come through the rift and whatever this warrior was. Then, the ground trembled. Not from explosions, not from Imperial ships breaking atmosphere. Something deeper. More final. The sky above twisted as the shadow swallowed more of the city, pulling the ruins into its shifting void. The Empire's war machines were already crumbling, their structures breaking apart like dust in the wind. Soldiers who hadn't fled in time vanished, twisted into the same unnatural nothingness that had claimed the first unlucky victims. The resistance leader took a slow step back, heart hammering. "If you're here to kill us, get it over with," they said, voice tight. "But if you know what's happening, now's the time to start talking." The armored figure didn't move right away. The fires of the collapsing city reflected off the battle-worn plating, and for the first time, the leader noticed something: scratches etched into the armor. Not symbols. Not damage. Names. Hundreds of them. Then the figure spoke. A voice old, worn, but unmistakably human. "This is not your war." The words hit like a physical blow. The resistance fighters exchanged glances. "Not our war?" one of them repeated. "They invaded our planet. They wiped out our people." The armored figure finally lowered the weapon. "This empire," the voice said, "was never meant to be your enemy." A slow glance toward the writhing darkness consuming the sky. That was. A deep, unnatural howl rippled through the air, making every nerve in their bodies scream in protest. The leader turned, watching as the first of the dark figures emerged in full force, spreading like a tide. They weren't just destroying. They were unmaking. The armored figure stepped forward. "They have no name," they said. "No form of their own. They devour. Take. Rewrite reality itself." A pause. "And they've been following the Empire for centuries." It didn't make sense. The Empire had been merciless, ruthless. They had hunted humanity to the brink of extinction. But now, they weren't fighting. They were running. The resistance leader's grip tightened on the data drive. If the Empire knew about this, why didn't they stop it? The armored figure turned, watching the sky twist into something that barely resembled space anymore. Because they thought they could control it, they said, and they failed. A terrible silence fell. Then, from above, the first of the dark entities noticed them. The resistance fighters felt it before they saw it, a creeping, sickening feeling in their bones, as if their very existence was being examined, taken apart. The armored figure raised their weapon again, but this time, it wasn't pointed at the resistance. It was aimed at the darkness. "You want to survive?" they asked. "Then we fight." The leader looked at the collapsing city, at the Empire's fleet crumbling, at the rift spreading across the sky like a wound. This had never been a war for Earth. It had always been a war for reality itself. The resistance leader tightened their grip on the rifle, staring at the armored figure. There were no more questions to ask. No time left to doubt. The Empire had tried to wipe humanity out, but now it was clear they had only been delaying something far worse. The real enemy had been waiting all along, and now it was here. The darkness moved with purpose, creeping forward like a tide, bending reality as it went. The ground beneath the resistance fighters cracked, the remains of buildings dissolving into nothing. The figures within the shadows watched, shifting, learning. The Empire's last warships blinked out of existence, consumed without a trace. The armored figure adjusted their stance. "It's already started," they muttered. "If we let it spread, there won't be anything left." The leader exhaled sharply. "Then what do we do?" The answer came in the form of movement, fast, deliberate. The figure charged forward, firing into the void, their weapon releasing a crackling energy that, for the first time, made the darkness hesitate. That was all the confirmation the resistance needed. The fighters rushed forward, opening fire. Bullets meant for Imperial soldiers now tore through the shifting creatures, forcing them to recoil. It wasn't about killing them, maybe nothing could, but slowing them down was enough. The fight wasn't about victory anymore. It was about time. The leader ran alongside the armored warrior, following their lead. "Tell me you have a plan." The figure nodded once. "The rift. We close it." It sounded impossible. The swirling wound in the sky had grown massive, tearing reality apart piece by piece. But hesitation wasn't an option. If they failed here, nothing else would matter. The resistance moved fast, weaving through the wreckage, cutting through whatever Imperial soldiers were left. Some had abandoned their posts, trying to escape. Others fought blindly, still refusing to believe the war had changed. None of them mattered now. Only the rift. Explosions shook the ground as another piece of the city crumbled into the void. The sky was barely recognizable, now stars gone, replaced with shifting nothingness. And in the center of it all, the rift pulsed like a beating heart. The leader felt something deep inside, something unnatural pressing against their mind. A whisper. Not words, but a feeling, something trying to rewrite them, to pull them into the void. They shook it off, forcing their focus back to the mission. The armored figure led them to the remains of an Imperial facility, half collapsed but still standing. "The Empire built this place to contain the rift," they explained. "We used their own technology to shut it down." The leader gave a bitter laugh. "They tried to control it. Now we're cleaning up their mess." The figure didn't respond. They just moved, fast and precise, leading them deep into the ruins. The resistance fighters held the line outside, buying time as more of the creatures approached, shifting and flickering, their forms unstable but relentless. Inside, the control room still had power. Flickering screens displayed unreadable data, warnings flashing in alien symbols. The armored figure wasted no time, moving to an interface and pressing a sequence of commands. The rift pulsed. The ground shook. Outside, the creatures reacted instantly, their movements growing erratic. They knew what was happening. The resistance held their ground, fighting against impossible odds. Every second mattered. Then something changed. The air thickened, the weight of reality shifting. The void creatures let out an unnatural shriek, their bodies unraveling as the energy around the rift intensified. The leader stumbled back. "It's working." But the armored figure didn't look relieved. They stepped away from the console, weapons still raised. It's not enough, they said. The rift isn't closing. It's collapsing. The realization hit all at once. The Empire had built this place to contain the rift, not destroy it. Whatever was keeping it open was inside the system, buried deep within the Imperial machines. And shutting it down meant destroying everything. The leader clenched their jaw. How much time do we have? The figure looked at the swirling rift, then back at them. Minutes. No way out. No escape. The resistance fighters outside fought on unaware. Some had already been lost, pulled into the void. The creatures were still pushing forward, desperate to stop what was happening. The leader exhaled. There was only one choice. They activated the final command. The facility's core flared to life, the energy surging toward the rift. The darkness recoiled, its figures twisting in agony. The city trembled as the sky itself seemed to pull apart, the tier in reality collapsing inward. Outside, the resistance fighters fell back, watching as the impossible unfolded. The void creatures screeched, their forms breaking, dissolving. The Empire's last warships flickered, their remnants sucked into the collapse. The armored figure stood firm as the rift shrank. The resistance leader felt their body weaken, the force pulling at them, but they held on, watching as the sky began to clear. And then silence. The rift was gone. The creatures were gone. The war was over. The resistance fighters who survived pulled themselves from the rubble, staring at the empty sky. No more empire. No more invaders. And no more impossible horrors lurking in the shadows. The leader took a slow breath, turning to where the armored figure had stood. But they were gone. No trace. No explanation. Only the names, scratched into the remains of the broken armor, lying in the dust. The leader picked it up, staring at the etchings. Then, without a word, they turned and walked away. The fight was over. But something told them the story wasn't.